Welcome to the making of a real-time strategy game, Part 8. Previously, we made an electrical grid, truck logistical system, robot flocking and aggro, more weapons, an economic system, an attempt to make the AI where the progress slowed down, and minor improvements to move the game forward. This video, we are further going to improve the aesthetics of the game by working on the terrain and props. It is time to improve the graphics. For Godot, there's a terrain editor available called Terrain 3D. Let's take a look. So how does it work? Well, it has a grid of vertices, and each one of them has a value for which textures to use. If we make the vertices larger, you can nearly see the grid as each square cell is visible. The texture can be blended on the base texture. It will combine the two and make soft transitions. There are other spray brushes that can also be used. And I should probably mix the grass over the stone, which makes more sense. It is also possible to add a color to darken areas. I ended up not using Terrain 3D for two reasons. The first is processing. When I was running it, I was only getting 30 frames a second just for Terrain 3D, nothing else in the scene. So given what my video card was, and I was guessing I had it on 1 teraflop, it was pretty old, and it did have old drivers, you require around 2 teraflops for it to run at 1080p. I was intending for the game to work on lower power laptops, so that was a bit too much. The other, which should be obvious, is that this tool is kind of like a drawing or painting tool, something I am not very good at, and likely it is very time consuming, given that I would likely have large maps. I have looked at other games, and I believe they do something similar, since if you zoom in, you can see the mixing of textures. However, I wonder if the other games do the mixing in real time, like Terrain 3D, or they pre-bake it in. I decided instead to use tiles with pre-made textures. I will now demonstrate how long it takes me to do the terrain with tiles. Blink and you might miss it. Not quite done. I gotta do the walls. The walls are made in Blender using 1K textures. The tiles are 2K textures, all from Ambientcg. I'll show you that later. If the textures are large enough, you're not really going to notice the tiling. And if you only use one, you don't need to worry about transition zones. Even if I use Texture 3D due to my lack of skill of an artist, I'm not sure I could do any better to make it worthwhile. Making the tiles are easy. Load Blender, make a large quad, say 50 by 50. Add texture to the material. Add the color, the normal, and the roughness texture file. Make sure the color is sRGB and the other two are non-colors. It doesn't look quite right yet. We need a normal map. Disconnect the normal in Blender. If you string out in a line, it will give you all the options. Pick normal map, wrong input, change it to color, and start increasing the strength until it looks good. Now you can see the depth. It is possible to change the UV mapping. I just leave it as is. Select the object and export it as a GLB. The tile has to be made into a mesh library in Godot. First, make a new scene. Then copy in the tile. Save it as a mesh library. Then it is available for a grid map. I only have one per grid map, since otherwise it may load them all into video memory, and since they are 2K, they do take up space. All the textures in the game are from the website Ambientcg. For the terrain textures, I use the 2K size. I added a shader, which makes trees brown when they are out of water. I need a way to divide space in the game, and I was no longer going to use Terrain 3D, which I previously thought I'd use to do this. After looking at the Cinti packs and how they made cliffs, I decided to make some walls myself that maybe would fit in better. I was wondering if I could do anything better than walls, since at this point the game is going to have a garden theme, and I'm unsure how much sense it makes to have cliffs or walls as dividers. And then I thought, why not trees? But then I realized I have trees as active objects, and it might be confusing if there's some in the background. So then why not things that are similar to trees? That might be in a garden. And then I started to make garden props. Originally, the models had their own pads that resemble soil. But later I realized I could add more roundness to the map by making larger pads instead. It definitely improves the aesthetics. I learned that mixing the models in a single pad looks better than just having one type. The garden objects are supposed to be in the player zone, and the other objects are supposed to be in the robot zone. The game keeps track of the player's progress, in particularly how many trees are planted and upgraded. The more trees that are planted, the greener the map becomes, in both the ground and the garden props. Shaders are used to do this. I can manually control this using the game options. Let's demonstrate each type. The flower bed goes from no flowers to all flowers. The pond goes from brown to blue and has lilies in it. All the other garden objects go from brown to green. And since they all use shaders, I can easily set them to be glow in the dark. Pretty cool, right? The robot objects also have shaders that are mainly time-based. The signpost points to the player's silo location and every robot base location. As the robot bases are destroyed, the signs are removed. This prompt shows the state of the trees if they are watered or not. So as you water your trees, it gets more green. So how are the shaders made? There are two main techniques used. The first is taking advantage of texture mapping. First, let's make a helix. It's under curve. This may have to be installed as an add-on. Go to the curve option and to bevel to give it shape. Convert it to a mesh. Notice that the UV is set correctly. As we go up, it increases the UV in the X direction. As we go around the circular portion, it increases in the Y direction. The oil barrels have several helixes that are offset. Let's see how the shader is set up in Godot. We load the model. The material is set to a shader. The fragment, I still call it a pixel shader. We have two bounds. If we are between either of them, draw the oil color. Otherwise, draw the base color. Sometimes the UV mapping is hard to do. Let's say we have a box, and let's extrude some of it. How do we map the height? So go to the UV unwrap and do it based off of the view. Notice that it is roughly correct to map the height to the Y component of the UV. They have other UV projections, but they aren't really going to do it correctly for the shaders. For more complicated spherical objects, usually you have to start with a sphere that is mapped correctly, and then alter it to fit the needs of the shader. The radar started as a sphere, so its mapping was retained for it. The other technique I use is with the vertex shader and to have the objects in a grid pattern. First, add shaders to the model. Let's take a look how it works. This is a standard random function that is well known and standard for shaders. All of the garden props are 5 units. It's also the size of the grid map cell. Since it contains 3 objects, well, 5 divided by 3 is 1.6. So that is what I use to index each one. So given the spacing and the start, it is possible to index each vertex to a proper cell. The random number has to be the same for each plant versus, say, for each individual vertex, because doing this would distort the model. The global X and Z is used, otherwise each garden prop will look exactly the same. Notice small movements in the global X and Z makes a large difference in the random numbers. Given the random numbers, pick a random scale and rotation. However, these can only be applied if the model is at its 0, 0. So first I have to recenter the model to the 0, 0. Then the rotation and scale is applied, and then the model is offset back to its grid position. Since this is a stem, there is only one color. The leaves have several color options, such as a gradient from bottom to top, also the green color, also the highlight tracer. Let's adjust the tracer. The tracer has a bias per plant, so not all of them are at exactly the same position at the same time. This makes it more interesting. The pixel shader is more or less the same code as the oil prop, except there is some extra mixing of colors. All of the plant shaders are similar. They all have a grid, just slightly different effects otherwise. Godot does not have a geometry shader, meaning every object must exist in its own mesh. However, not all of them have to be drawn. Some of them can be hidden. The signpost has a variable amount and up to 20 possible signs, so they are all hidden in the base and rescaled if they are to be drawn. They should always be hidden in the original model. Since they are placed beside the model, making the base larger, they will be used for collision detection even if they're not drawn. The terrain is done, the props are done. It's ready, right? I can now put together maps and release the game, maybe in a month or 2. This is originally how I thought the game development was going to go, but it is not going to be that easy. There are still some things that need to be improved, such as the AI before I can start on maps. And making maps is a skill by itself that takes some time to develop. I did not actually make all the props in a week, maybe around half of them, and the others were made in the next few months. Usually it takes me a day to make one, but I decided to show them all in this video. Will the next video have as much progress as this one, or will the struggle continue? Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.